All right, so everybody, welcome, welcome, welcome. We are here for this masterclass on how to build inclusive high-performance teams. Emphasis on the word inclusive. I am here with my good friend Faith Clarke, who is an organizational health and teamwork specialist. So we'll get to Faith in a minute, but Faith, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
So good to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited. So Shelby, if you can just go to the next slide for me. Just a reminder to everybody, I've been saying this as you've been streaming in, but we're going to keep the phones muted, but feel free when we get to the question part, if you want to unmute and ask your question directly, you are welcome to do that. In the meantime, put any questions you have in the chat. If there's things that are on your mind, this is just a really hot topic right now, and I think Faith and my goal is to give you the information that you need in terms of where you're at and this conversation. So don't be shy. I always think if it's on your mind, it's probably on everybody else's mind too. And we will be kind of monitoring that through the program. I have sent, Faith and I had kind of a pre-call. We've got a few questions we're going to start working through, but as we're going along, feel free to chime in and I'll keep my eye on either the Q&A or the chat for that. So let's get started. So Shelby, we can stop screen sharing now, and I am going to introduce everybody to my good friend Faith. So Faith, thank you for being here. We met, I want to say it's almost 3 years ago now.
I think so, right? Yeah.
I think so. We were both working on our books and our first
end of 2017.
I feel like, yeah. It
Yeah.
was the end of 2017. And yeah, I was fortunate to be sitting with Faith at the table, and as we were kind of going through how to finish writing and launching our books, which was a very daunting task. It took me another 2 years to actually finish mine. I think you were much better than me at coming out of the gate with your book, but have always kept in touch. And I think recently, for all of us, there's been a couple of really big conversations that have been going on in the world. And one of them has been around this notion of inclusiveness. So I wanted to just get you to tell us a little bit about your background, but also, how you got into this work of team inclusiveness and the kind of work that you do, to give everybody a bit of context and flavor before we dive into the conversation.
Oh, well, thank you, though, Glain, for just holding this beautiful space, because I actually feel really included and like I belong here, which is the key to just all our teams working healthily. In a prior life, I was an engineer, and I gave that up and went into helping people learn in some different ways in the college level and academics, and then came home when I discovered that my son had autism. And when I was completely overwhelmed by how autism would work and how learning would work, I kind of pulled both my engineering and teaching skills together. I got a bunch of college and grad students together and said, hey, let's help my son meet his goals. And for me, that kind of is the beginning of me formally working with teams, because before, friends would ask me to help them with strategic planning or help them teach their team something, because I was wearing the educator hat. But in that moment, I saw how all the pieces fit together and how all these different people with different backgrounds, because they weren't all teachers, some were dancers, some were performing artists. I loved having performing artists on the team. How to get people with a bunch of different thoughts working together towards the value of my son, keep them excited, because they were volunteers. And I realized that teamwork wasn't tied to how much you pay people. And then helping them feel like family. And so that's basically what I created. And as time went on and I ran my own business, helping families create home teams, on the side, I was still doing strategic planning and learning development for organizations. And I really saw how all these pieces came together. So in my doctoral work, I'm now doing this exploration on how do we help people get on the same page and kind of create that. I saw you in your notes, you call it the mind meld. I call it this collective kind of juicy intuition that then we can be on the same page without everybody stopping every second to check in. Because lots of the problems we're solving as teams have to be, like with my son, it's dynamic. It's not, we can't script it. It's not really rehearsed. It's not like a symphony or something. Yeah. So you have to be able to both know what you need to do, what others need to do, and know how to improvise on the spot. So all of those things kind of came together, and that was my team stuff. And then just to kind of comment on inclusion, I hired people with autism to work on my team. And I also started to realize that lots of families are worrying about, how will my kid with autism have meaningful work? And so the question was, well, what makes a person who has the skills feel like they can be included in workspaces and recreational spaces and community spaces? And so, in terms of our conversation on this, a lot of the racial issues that we're facing, it was like, oh, inclusion is inclusion is inclusion. And whether it's about the racial issues, which are, so we need to address those, or it's about, I don't know how to include myself because I judge myself so poorly as the kind of person, so I'm busy pretending to be someone else. Like, we have layers of not including whatever we consider to be different and bad. And we really have to, deconstruct them so we can work together.
Yeah, I love that. And I think talking to you, I'd never really, thought about inclusion in such a broad sense, right? And for me, the conversations that we've had have really helped me reframe what it means to be an inclusive team, to be an inclusive team leader, to create inclusive spaces. So I'd love to kind of actually start there a little bit and unpack this word inclusion and talk a little bit about, when we think about, because we hear so much about high performance teams and, building and you need diversity. And yet, I think we interchange these words, diversity and inclusion. And so would love to have you kind of unpack these concepts for us a little bit more, and how you view inclusion and difference between being inclusive and having a diverse team, where there overlaps, where they're distinct pieces.
Yeah. So, Glain, I approach things from like the psychology lens. And so it really is about what humans crave for me. And I think we crave deep relationships. We crave belonging, just fundamentally as humans. We also crave the ability to do good work and to be competent at what we do and to share that with others, right? And this is just kind of basic human needs. And I think so inclusive spaces are spaces that help us do that help us, that feel like it's good to be here. People want me here. I am a part of the collective, and this collective helps me feel like I can thrive. So it's both belonging, and I get to grow here, and I feel grateful that I'm in this space because both I belong and I feel like I can grow and thrive, just in the really general sense. What I've seen a lot in how we've operationalized in the diversity and inclusion conversations, we kind of made this about numbers and about metrics, and there is a thing that we're doing, and we think that these numbers are the ways that we would prove that we're doing this thing. And yet when you go into these spaces, I was talking to a D&I person actually in a pretty Fortune maybe 100 company, and it still is very thin on the top. As a woman, as a Black woman in that space, it's still very thin. So it's like, if we are being more inclusive, why are the Black female executives leaving and starting their own companies? Like we're checking off things on lists. And diversity seems to mean more a percentage of people in the place versus do the people feel like they belong. So it's funny, years and years ago, I have a friend at a pretty significant level in one of the companies, and she says, hey, there is a space here for somebody to design learning for our company. Do you want to apply? So I put that application in, and then she said, but 2 Black women can't be in a senior role in this company because they're gonna pit us against each other, and you're my friend and I can't. And it was fascinating just to kind of be in that moment where she's like, I have to choose between friendship and this thing that might be good for you, and I can't lose you as a friend. And we kind of both just decided that I wouldn't, because that's just how it happens. 2 Black women are going to be pit against each other. Wow. And there's going to be the good one so we really want to start listening to the conversations about, although we might be checking numbers off, what are we doing or not doing that have people feeling like they don't belong, that they're the other, versus creating the us.
Well, and I think for me, there's so many things in that. And the one thing that comes up to me is, wow, the stories we tell ourselves, right, about what what will happen if two Black women come together. I would say, you know, I worked in a women's organization where somebody said to me really bluntly, they said, hey, you have to recognize that some women like being the only woman at the table, and they have no interest in, because that's their brand. Their brand is that they are the only, you know, female or female of color or whatever it might be, right, at the table. And so, you know, it's so interesting. So there's a piece of those stories. I think the other thing that you had said to me, which it was such a profound insight for me personally, is the self, like, so the self, and you alluded to this, it's like what's within yourself and the beliefs that you have about yourself. And I think the awareness that I gained, and again, I'd love you to sort of, you know, share more with this, is this idea that you do not know when people come into a space, when people join your team, you don't know those stories that they're telling themselves about how they need to show up or should show up in a group, or what's acceptable for them to say or not say in a group, because of the conditioning or previous experiences or all of those things that we, all of us bring into a situation. But I think there were some things about, you know, I think when you're the minority voice at the table, or feel that you're that, how does that hold you small? How does that change how you feel inclusion? And what can people who are in the majority do to make sure that that cavern is, you know, it's almost like an invisible cavern, I think, because I think when you're blindly oblivious to it,
right,
you don't know that somebody else is struggling with that. So what could you kind of share around
so many thoughts there, right? There's so many. So I think the first thing that all of us have to accept is that we all have privilege in some way. And that means that we all also don't have privilege in some way. And if we can pay attention to the places where we don't have privilege, and we can kind of tune into what we need from people in those places where we don't have privilege. So I'll use me and you. Your eyes are probably not as bad as mine. But if I take these glasses off right now, I need to be led around by the hand.
Yeah.
And so I need to be in my comfortable space, because at home I can be fine. Out I can't be. So what would I need if I was going to be home? And I think every team leader, every organizational leader, every manager needs to do this individual work, because I can tell you what people need, but you aren't going to organically do what people need. We need to do what we need. And many of us have not been tapping into what would we need if we were not privileged? What would we need if we were not in the majority? So we kind of have to use the examples that are around us to help us. Now, for me, that was helpful to have a child with autism, because as his mother, although I don't have autism, I was really steeped in what my privilege as an able neurotypical person, and therefore what he needs from community in terms of being accepted and feel like he belongs. And so I think if we can kind of give ourselves the opportunity to acknowledge that, then we can take those principles and then start to scan the spaces around us. For every space where there's a majority, people are on the fringes. And if we don't notice, that's because we're centering. We are centering ourselves as this is norm and this is okay and I can be centered. And I was in a really sharp conversation. I wasn't the one being sharp, but it was really, it was stingy, as many of these conversations can be, where the person was just saying, hey, listen, when we're centering, that's toddler behavior. That's it. In other words, it is our more immature side, even when we're unaware of it, that kind of makes us to be, this is what the frame is. And it's such a challenge for all of us to say, how do I step into that more mature space where I can actually be looking for the other? Yeah. And to build the practices to look for the other. So I actually don't tend to accept when people say, hey, I don't know what to do, as you and I had this conversation.
Yeah.
Like this, I don't know what to do is just us hiding, right? Yeah. It is us not being willing to step into the space where we are that person who's on the fringes, right? So figure out what you would want done if you were at the party and not dancing. Figure out what you would want done if you were so nervous about showing up at the party, but you showed up anyway, and you feel like you're dressing odd, or whatever the analogy is, figure that out. And then I think in our workspaces, the next thing that we might want to do is to have really honest conversations with the people who are there, who are on the fringes, but not from the point of view, I like, no, so teach me what to do. But it's like, really, I have no idea. I acknowledge that I might be messing this up. I really might be doing a poor job. I think I'm woke. I think I am, just very contemporary, and yet maybe I'm not, and kind of really approach it from that place of vulnerability. And then say, so I want you to call me on the times when I may be like just saying stuff that has you feeling included, and I, and be open enough about it just to start those conversations with people who may be able to be willing to accept that some people might say, no, it's not my job to teach you. But there are lots and lots of people who already love you, who are willing to say, sure, I will say that this felt uncomfortable to me when it does, so.
Yeah, I want to pause on this conversation because, and I'll be with everybody on the call. I want to be really crystal clear on what I said to Faith and what she said to me back. I said to Faith, as a white woman, I'm just not, like, it's hard to know what to do. Like, I want to do something, but I don't know what to do. And Faith, with her love, said back to me, okay, when you say that, it's like you're standing at the end of the driveway and you're not walking up with me to be a part of this. It's at a distance. This question is distancing yourself, right? And I think what I've heard from many people in the last few weeks or months, I don't know, I'm losing track of time. I don't know how long it's been now. It feels like forever, right?
COVID time warp.
Oh my gosh, we're in a time warp. But I think that there's a lot of, and I'm going to say white people, I think there's a lot of people, first of all, that are having to confront the fact that they've been, I think, to use Ibram Kendi's kind of analogy, we've been standing in the rain of racism for so long we don't realize we're wet. It's just been coming down on us for so long that you don't even realize that it's all around us. You look at history, how whitewashed it's been, the central figure of the white savior, it is in everything, right? And so it's not that we are inherently, for many of us speaking, is that we don't think we've been consciously racist or consciously not anti-racist, as Kendi would say, and so then we go, well, but I'm a good person, I don't, and so there's this defensive reaction. And what I love about what you just said, which I think is the flip, because people say, but I don't know what to do, and so I don't know how to step forward. That's a very different question than saying to somebody, hey, I think I'm probably screwing this up, and I have a ton of blind spots around how my behavior is impacting yours, and would you please call me out on that? Yeah. Giving that, like creating that, opening that conversation, that avenue, and then really listening. Because I think what then happens is, again, our defensiveness kicks in, because we want to be seen as good people. This goes against value systems that a lot of us have. So our defensiveness, and instead of stopping and listening and acknowledging, we feel the need to defend. Yep. Right? And I see a lot of that with friends of mine that will immediately go to defensive, and it's a little bit like, okay, just hold on a second. Somebody is sharing with you their perception in that moment. And I think as team leaders, so to bring this back into the context of the organization and things like that, when you are leading a team, this willingness to be vulnerable and willingness to say just what you've said is so critical, I think, to helping us advance these conversations and to create the mindsets and openness that we need to create inclusivity.
Absolutely. I think there's the idea, I remember we talked about this too, the idea of stereotype threat keeps coming back to me, because the researcher who came up with or made stereotype threat an idea is an African-American social psychologist. And he basically said, he wrote this book, Whistling Vivaldi. And he describes this moment when he is walking down the street wearing his hoodie in his grad school town, white neighborhood, as an African descent man, and felt when people started to feel uncomfortable with him. And then he started to whistle Vivaldi, and he felt their perception change. And so his research just has been around how stereotypes affect us and how the awareness of the stereotype. He is not thinking anything's wrong with him as a Black man and that he is a danger. He's just aware that they might be thinking that and how it affects him. And so the research basically says that if people know that there's a stereotype that affects their identity, it cuts their performance. It cuts their performance.
Yes.
And so every time I'm, in spaces where I think, how is the presence, the idea of racism, the idea of the gender issues, the idea of people with autism not being able to control themselves, or are they insane, or whatever the ideas are, how are those ideas actually stopping the power of our teams?
Yes.
And so when we look on teams and we see only some voices speaking and some people not speaking, those people who aren't speaking, I wonder, what are the stereotypes that are active, that are being stimulated in the environment, right? And they're not being deactivated. How are those stereotypes affecting how this team is showing up? And we think it's, oh, we're hiring the wrong people. Oh, we need a different strategic plan. Oh, whatever it is. But actually, we need to shut some of those stereotypes off. And so back to your point about trust and vulnerability, one of the biggest ways to shut off a stereotype is to acknowledge it.
Yes.
So what's the elephant in the room? Let's call it out. Let's be willing to talk about, let's say, I have no idea, but probably I've been complicit in this whole thing. Because when we do that, it makes such a difference. The stereotype kind of loses some of its horns. You're like, oh, okay. We all know this is happening here.
Yeah.
And
And I love that, because when I think about high performance teams, and certainly in our work with coaching teams, I mean, one of the things that we talk a lot about is this idea of, you need to make these conversations second nature. You need to create a platform to talk about performance where expectations are clear, how we deal with these situations is clear. When we see that elephant in the room, how do we surface it as a team? The more we can create that, the more then we can focus on how do we keep getting better. But the more we allow those things to sit within a team,
it takes up so much energy.
It is.
Yeah, it sucks the life and the energy out. And so you're using up energy and productive capacity, keeping that thing alive and hidden. And so
And so what do you think it takes to kind of get to your team? I mean, we talked a little bit about this, this idea of getting to this, I said, mind meld, like where teams can really read each other. What are some of the things that you see have to be in place, or the conversations that have to be surfaced that really allow a team to get into that state, that flow state together as a group?
Yeah, I think that one of the things two key things set this up. First of all, not every team is a team. Not every, or rather, some teams are just groups of people are working for this one person, And so I ask leaders to check that. If people are all kind of loyal or sort of loyal to you, and there isn't this crosstalk, there isn't this kind of this collective anything, you are the gateway and you are the bottleneck, you don't have a team. And so let's do some team formation. And sometimes that team formation is just having people sign on to an idea. And we think that hiring people puts them in the team, but that's not really, the thing. And so whatever, I call it a starting ritual. And every new person needs to be part of that starting ritual. But whatever it is, anything that has people feeling like, wow, I am part of this thing and doing this amazing work. I think that has to be the first piece, because built into that starting ritual is also, and I can trust these people with me to get that work done.
Yes.
And that first, trust runs across the lifespan of a team, but it has to start with this kind of like, whoa, this is awesome and amazing, these people, we're going to work together to make this happen. So that's kind of like my first thing. And the second thing is that I think really interferes with inclusivity is handing work to people. Like I'm not a fan of giving people work as much as teams co-creating work. Now, I'm not saying that goals should be flexible and, objectives should be flexible, but there is a how that has to be unique to the team. And the team has to be flexible enough to say, okay, so Glain is this way and Faith is this way and Faith and what's the work that we need to do and how do we shape this work in a way that gets you working in your maximal sweet spot, you communicating in your maximal way, and then us creating an outcome that really fits us. And I call this part of the inclusivity because that's the place where you get to expose and capitalize on differences. versus requiring conformity and sameness.
Yeah, I mean, and I think so much of our organizations are based on like such a military industrial model, aren't they? So it's very hierarchical. And what you're really talking about here is the system, right? And all of us as humans are part of this connected system together. And so the more we can look through a systemic lens at our team and not be, I remember years ago hearing somebody say, you know, if you laid out everybody's job descriptions, right? Like job descriptions are just so archaic. And this was like, I heard this person probably 15, 20 years ago at this point. If you laid out everybody's job description, the work actually gets done in the spaces between the pieces of paper that are laid out on the table, right? And we need to move away from this sort of idea of, okay, Faith does this task, Glain does this task, this is what we're, you know, set to do, and look more at strengths, interests. You know, like in coaching, we go, what's your zone of genius? You know, like, and how can you bring more of that to the group? But I think underpinned to that is this, you know, going back to what you said at the start, is this notion of creating that trust, and that, I'm going to use the word, the buzzword of du jour, psychological safety, that people can put out where they feel those things are, and also where their shortcomings are, because it's a little bit about being able to say, hey, you know, like I had a conversation earlier this morning with a member of my team where I said, you know what, I'm on a project right now that I have zero energy for. And I know I'm not, it's not aligning for me.
Right.
And I feel like it would give her more energy, but I have to be comfortable admitting that. And as leader of the company saying, I don't think I'm the right person for this. Right.
And so to be okay. Yeah. And knowing that that's fantastic. Like specialization automatically means that there's some things that you're not going to do super well, and really allowing yourself to be in a high energy state is a gift to the team. And I think if team leaders knew that, about everybody being in a high energy state, like if this doesn't serve one person on the team, for interconnected teams, it doesn't serve anybody. And if we can kind of keep that in our mind, then we're constantly monitoring. Each team member is monitoring for what's happening here. Oh, this kind of project. So even if I'm on a project that's not in my zone of genius, me being willing to know that, and then me being willing to disclose that, and so, okay, fine, we have goals and we have deadlines and we have to be accountable, so we'll do this. But I know that, okay, good, I learned something about myself, and I offer this to the team as, oh, this is not the best way for me to use my time, and maybe if we modified it this way, somebody else might be saying, oh, but that stuff that you just said you hated, I love. And, you know, and having that dynamism, knowing that we're not static, even as people, and I can love something this year and need to shift it again next year, because what we set up, if we don't acknowledge that, is this other idea I read in a book where this guy basically taught people to leave their jobs, you know, and find a new job once they've hit the 51%, he said. So if you've learned more than 51% of the job, if you're kind of good at it and you're craving a new like experience because it's becoming the norm for you, leave and go get a new job. And I'm like, fine, we could say that, but that's the industrial model. We could also say that as we're growing and developing and some things are feeling like they're not challenges or not energizing more, how can this work morph to accommodate that? Or how does this impact our outcomes that we're creating together?
Yes.
You know, so.
It is really about co-creating, right? Like I think the model we use all the time in the work that we do is this idea of what are your needs and offer as an individual, and what are the needs and the offer that the company can make to you, and what does the balance look like that? And when it's really out of balance, what's the conversation, the roadmap to have the conversation to create more balance amongst those two pieces, right? Because we have business is moving so quickly, life is moving so quickly that we're in a constant state of readjustment.
Yes.
Right. So what was your priority? I even think, like with my team, especially going through COVID, literally every week we were realigning on what's our priority for the next week.
Right.
I couldn't do it. We actually tried to do an offsite planning in June. I gave up on it. We ended up doing a 3-month plan because that's all we could think about, you know, in terms of where the pandemic was and where we needed to be right now. Right. So I think it means that as leaders, as team leaders, it's this constant recalibration, isn't it? Right? When you're bringing in new people onto a team, how do you recalibrate the team and revisit those agreements, to your point, that you've made as a team, and that collective shared purpose that you have as a team? How do you bring others into that conversation?
It's really the team practice, right? Because we're building practitioners of this whole thing of belonging, co-creation, doing high quality work. And just having that as the baseline practice, I call it the container for the team, where there's an effective piece, there's trust, is, you know, there's that emotional affective piece, and then there's the communication. How do we actually talk about this stuff, you know? And then there are interactions together. What are our behaviors together? And that container, and how we keep adjusting that and keeping that in place, then all the other stuff, just strategy and the tasks and the teamwork, that, you know, all the stuff fits in there. But if we don't hold that container, then it's, you know, we end up with, you had mentioned this question of what does high performing mean to me? I think we end up in situations where people do good work, but it's exhausting. So it's not sustainable. I mean, people think that poor teamwork is the work doesn't get done. And like, that's definitely a problem. You shouldn't have a team where the work is not getting done. But it's not healthy when the work is getting done, but it's costing people too much. Then you either have detachment, lack of engagement over time, or you have the revolving door, in which case you can't ever get to that juicy place of togetherness.
Well, and you know what, this makes me kind of really think about the question I had for you, which was around conflict within a team. And what I see with the teams that we work with, they're almost on two sides of the spectrum. They're either even way too much conflict, which borders the team on dysfunctional. And it's, you know, really the conflict is between the individuals, right? It's not the team itself, but it's, you know, these relationships within a team and the system that cause the conflict. Or there's no conflict. Right? They're being too nice. They're not. And you know, it's funny because right now I feel like there's not enough conflict in some teams, because since COVID, and we've all been working remotely, and you know, everybody's been managing, and I find it's a bit amusing to me when I speak to some senior leaders. They'll say, "Yeah, no, productivity is still great. It's still work." And I'm thinking, meanwhile, as I'm talking to the people in the teams that are on the verge of burnout, they're about to, you know, have nervous breakdowns,
leaving the job and stuff.
Oh my God. We're not having a conflict around, hey, we need better boundaries, the way you're managing me. Like, micromanagement is spiking up because you got a whole bunch of leaders who don't know how to adjust their approach to a different form of, or a different model, right? So talk to me a bit about conflict and your views of good conflict versus bad, and how do you create that constructive conflict that a team needs to grow? Because I think sometimes conflict gets a bad rap, right?
I don't think you can co-create work together without conflict, because it's on those edges that when we move through that we discover the better plan, whatever that better plan, you know, is. And so I think that the mind things that we have that say conflict is bad, or that I'm being disrespectful, or that people are being disrespectful to me. Part of this has to be that all of us need to kind of just check what are our views on conflict. And some of that stuff is, you know, in my home, good things meant quiet. My grandmother was quiet. We know, she was happy. She didn't spend a lot of time on productive, positive communication. Right? So if she was talking about stuff, she was on, like, we have background stories around conflict that we bring into the workplace, and we have to be willing to address those, and so that we have the communication pathway has to be open, and that means sharing positive stuff and also being willing to talk about things that feel uncomfortable. So let's check in our mind stuff. I think that the trust building is, if there is anything I would say teams have to be doing all the time, is the trust building. If you're not able to have good conflict, don't work on conflict resolution mechanisms yet, because people will mechanize those things to check boxes off. We have to say, why are we not willing to be uncomfortable with each other? Oh, we don't trust each other. I don't trust you enough to say something that could make me feel bad and make you feel bad, and I may lose my job. Like, all of that's what's going on. And we have to be willing to figure out how much trust and vulnerability do we want on this team. And honestly, some team leaders say, none. I don't want any Like if they get really honest, they're like, no, that vulnerability thing is not super, I don't think so. Let them just, yeah, it's good when they keep that negativity to themselves, right? And if team leaders don't want that vulnerability, then we will ever have either no conflict or too much conflict. I think then that when we are willing to, with the foundation of trust, have some hard conversations, if we say we want to do it, then we also now have to set up some structures around it to help people be willing. So for example, in a particular kind of conversation, say, all right, you know, this person will talk and then this person will talk, and then we're going to kind of just look at what is similar and what is different, and having some people acting in some kind of mediator role where they're just note taking and things like that. We may need, depending on how vulnerable and unstable conflict can get in a team, having some structures around how people can internally be mediating difficult conversations and shifting the roles around, so that, okay, I'm the person that's just listening, I'm saying, so what John said was da-da-da-da, but Mary, you were saying, you know, and structures will help us learn some new behaviors while we're also building up our trust. So those are kind of top of mind. But I think if any team leader is not having conflict, that should be their priority.
Yeah, I mean, no, it's so true, right? And I think I love what you said too about understanding your own view. Like, I know I'm an avoider when it's personal. When it's business, I'm an antagonizer. I'm the opposite. Like, I'll go right at you when it's a business related thing. But if there's a personal relationship there, I will come up with all kinds of reasons not to be direct with you about, you know, how I'm feeling. Dolores had a question, which I think really kind of leans on this. So I just want to kind of tag it. She says, I understand a leader needs to start by being vulnerable. However, when people are used to having their guard up, how do you encourage the trust so that people are open up and benefit from coaching? She's talking about it in a peer coaching context. I think it's the same in a team leader. I've had, you know, leaders that are trying to be more coach-like with a team that's been used to a very hierarchical hub and spoke kind of manager. So what's if you were to give somebody some advice where you want to create this within the team, but the team's uncertain, not ready, what are some of the things? I think you've mentioned a couple, but are there any other things that a team leader can do to kind of create that environment for people?
So when we're trying to create a radically different environment from what we've already had, I think you have to do something almost disruptive. So it's back to that starting ritual. We can have a, you know, new team, new day, whatever, but having an event or an experience that models the kind of trust or vulnerability that you want to create. So I'd sometimes have a half a day or 3-hour type of thing where it's just improv and experiential activities, and people are being vulnerable around unimportant things as a way, and then having some vulnerability around important things that have nothing to do with work. Right. But setting it up as an experience, as its own experience, and then modeling within that. Because when you're modeling within the context of work and it's the first time, people don't know, is this the norm? Is this something new? Is this just her? Did she have some new awakening? You know, people don't know what's going on. But within the new context, they'll have an experience that then you can debrief and say, how did that feel? What was going on for you? What did it seem like when I ran around holding the, you know, bottle and pretending it was an earring? And then bring that back to the work and have the conversation about how that could be impactful with our work together, our coaching together, or, you know, whatever it is. And then set some guidelines from there, which then you monitor, because it becomes, when we set these new guidelines now, if we don't monitor them like crazy people, it's not going to happen. Because we step back into our norms very easily, you know. So it's like, okay, remember when we had this experience, we were doing this thing, so okay, be explicit. Okay, I'm going to practice now, and then practice it, you know, just kind of signposting whatever our new behaviors are going to be as part of the modeling of that vulnerability. But I definitely think even having an outsider come in and facilitate it, if it feels hard for the team leader or somebody to facilitate it, so that everybody gets immersed in gets a body understanding of the new practice.
Yeah, No, I love that. I think, and it is to your point, it's like building a new muscle. Like you have
Yeah.
to be really intentional about it, or else it'll feel a little flavor of the monthy. And I think, circling back to what you said earlier, and I just want to encourage everybody on the call, now's the time if you have questions that you want us to kind of dive into, please put them in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll circle back to them. But one of the things that I think we have to recognize as team leads and as human beings in general, right? It's our experiences that create our belief systems, and then that drives our actions, which ultimately will get the results that we're looking at. And so it's so important that we understand, like if you're seeing different actions, you actually have to unpack what's the beliefs and experiences that people have had. So you may come in saying, hey, I'm really an inclusive leader, and let's all talk and sing kumbaya and do all the things, get to know each other, and you can tell me anything and I'm not going to hold that against you in your career. But if I've had an experience where my old boss said that to me, and in fact what happened was he then shared with HR that I had this insecurity and now HR didn't promote me into that role and I'm not going to be coming at you going, okay, here, sure. Right? We hear a lot of that with mentoring programs, internal mentoring programs, where people have had mentoring programs in companies, and certain mentors get that reputation of being the one that you would never, ever actually tell the truth to.
Right.
Because of the way they circle that forward. So experiences, and what are the stories that people tell themselves, and what are the things that you need to be aware of before as a team, so that you're stepping back. I think it's exactly what you circle back into. It's like, start with yourself. What would you need if you were taking over a team that was the environment that they were used to having, or if you're stepping into an organization where the culture is very different than a culture that you've been used to. Mm-hmm. What are the adjustments that we need to make as leaders, right?
Yeah. And I think when you are trying to create a culture on a team that's different from the culture outside the team within the organization, that's hard work.
Yeah.
And owning that's hard work with the team. Like you can't kind of magically do that with the team and also maintain the situation outside. That's going to be a burnout situation for you as a team leader. So, but together as a team, you can say, we understand that this is what's happening, but here we want to create this bubble of safety and health for us. We think this would be useful. And if that's a sign on of the local we, then I think that there's a much greater chance. Even if people aren't used to that in the outside, building that internal trust can happen if that's something people want. Mm-hmm. And again, that's back to the elephant in the room. Just call it out. It does sometimes feel as if, the moment you say something personal, it's being used against you in that space. And so we want to build a container here where, and just talk about it. And people trust isn't built like that, but trust has multiple components. But the two that I think about is the feeling of trustworthiness. There's an emotional piece there. And then there's also, is there data? Like, what do we know about you? But so the team leader gets the opportunity to build this new data with this team that will build up the trust. Is the trustworthiness based on what we see with our eyes or we experience.
So there's something that you're making me curious about right now, and I'm thinking something about one of the things that team leaders often do, and we use extensively in organizations, is we bring in these tools, right, to get to know each other, whether it's DISC or colors or Myers-Briggs or whatever. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how do those either enable this inclusive environment that we want to create or get in the way of it?
Mm-hmm. That's a good question about getting in the way, and I'd love to think about that a little bit. I use tools a lot because I always felt that I didn't fit any tool. So I use it as a curiosity probe for my own self-learning, and I encourage it that way. So I do think that part of being included is to allow yourself to be seen. But we often aren't able to disclose fully who we are. And I don't think a tool can disclose fully who you are either, but it does provide this concrete thing that you can respond to yes or no. And so I love having, like I had a team member in another team recently do one of my current favorite tools, which is predictive index. And I like it because it has 2 questions, so it's quick. And she did it, and the result that came back, she was like, yeah, it's kind of like me. And so I was like, huh, that's interesting. What part's not resonating for you? And she was like, it's made me out to be this, 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 which is true, question sign. But these parts, like it didn't notice this thing. So this thing is important to you. And I feel like when we use tools and people can kind of respond to them in candid ways, it helps with their self-disclosure and helps, you know, with language that other people can use. Saying all of that, I do say that I prefer to use multiple tools because I do think multiple lenses on this. It's more about the disclosure than are you INTJ? You know, it's like, what does this mean about who you are? And then the other thing I think a tool helps with is that, oh, so you are INTJ. That means blah, blah, blah. I wonder what it feels like. So I am an S, and that means that I don't blah, blah, blah. But you're N. What would that feel like in this situation we just had? And really helping people practice perspective shifting, which is a muscle that seems to be hard in these times, just looking through somebody else's eyes. And a tool can kind of help, oh, people who are using DISC, people who are Ds, my friend and I tend to be high D and so is she. And so we're like, okay, I'm switching into D now. And then we're like, set a disclaimer, like, oh, okay, I understand what's happening here, that you're not being an ass. What's happening is that you're just prioritizing, you know, and having people practice this shifting through the lens of some language that's not necessarily the organic language can really build muscles. Of course, tools are biased, right? So it's to kind of be aware that also exists, so it's not the truth about a person.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I totally relate to what you're saying. I mean, I think one of the things tools give us is a shorthand. Like in our organization, we've done colors, and so I have a team that's fairly green, which is that, you know, helpful energy and people-based energy. And I'm constantly saying to them, I need you to dial up the red on this one, which is the more forceful, directive kind of energy. And so we use it as a shorthand. And I think they would say to me sometimes, can you please dial down the red? I tend to go red, you know, because of all that green energy, right? And so I think when it comes as an awareness and as a leader, but I think the key thing here, because this is where I've seen tools create division and not inclusion, is where the leader is a certain profile, everybody knows, and those who have the similar profile to the leader are suddenly in the in crowd.
Yeah.
Those that are different from the leader are suddenly, like, we create this circle of relationships. So if you're not a Heidi, and especially in organizations, because let's face it, a lot of leadership qualities tend to float into certain, you know, whether it's a Myers-Briggs type profile or anything else. And what we have to be careful of is that we don't make assumptions and preclude people that don't fit on that piece of paper. Like I had one of colleagues of mine was told based on her assessments that she would never be a senior executive. Well, she's been a successful CEO for years, but she didn't fit the stereotype. I mean, they're man-made tools. Like, we have to be careful with how we use them, right? So I think for me, one of the things that I'm curious about what your thoughts on this, but for me, it's super important if you're the leader that you role model inclusivity of the other colors, letters, whatever it is, and value those contributions within your team to create inclusiveness. Or else they can become, like, I see the potential for division. I've seen it with a few of our folks.
Yeah, it kind of comes back to that centering, right? Because we create these hierarchies and put ours at the top.
Yes.
This is me, and I'm this way, and I'm like, you know, this is the right way to be. And so, yeah, it is back to our internal practice of acknowledging that I celebrate individuality and interconnectedness, because the whole needs both the honoring of the individual and the strength of the connections between the two to make the thing work. And both have to work together. And so then, yes, it is this leader's practice of, like, I really need this, and not kind of making it less than. And so I heard that same language in a conversation I was having with a couple of people where the task, just implicit in the language, the task was made less than. Oh, you're doing big picture things and I'm just doing this grunt work.
Yes.
And I'm thinking this grunt work here that I don't do well for myself costs me fines in filing taxes. Right? So it's like this, it can't be that this is better than that, but we have that kind of structure in our minds, and then we do it with people, we've done it with race, we've done it with gender, you know, it's that centering, and yeah, we have to kind of challenge ourselves with that.
Well, and I think with teams too, there becomes that tendency, and if you're somebody who fits, whose style and approach is very different than the rest of the team, how the team includes you in that and brings your strengths forward is so critical, right? I've seen people feel the need to justify their approach in front of, because they're not, you know, we have one of the tools that we use with teams is an energy motivator, and a lot of the words are triggering, right? One of the motivators is excelling. Are you a high excelling person? Well, I don't know any senior executive that doesn't want to see high energy for excelling. But if you get 5th percentile and all your colleagues are 80th, you know, how the team responds to that, how the team then views you in that. And I think that's where in coaching teams, as we do, you know, helping the teams really use that information. I always feel like for good and not for evil, right? And as a way to accelerate and not pull the team apart, because we unintentionally create division in some of these, the language of some of these tools that are out there. Right?
That was like how I reacted to the J in judging. It's like judging.
Yes. Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, and then we'll hear people say, well, ENTJs are the best leaders. Like, you know, they're the ones that you want to, you know, be behind, and
right.
then does that mean the rest of us are not as going to be successful if we're leading?
Right. No. Yeah,
so, all right, well, listen, I'm going to just double check. I don't think there's any more questions that have come in, but Faith, thank you so much. This has been just an incredible conversation with you. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. I know you've given us so many sort of thoughts and ideas on kind of key elements for, you know, building our own inclusive teams, high-performing teams. Any sort of lasting words of advice, words of wisdom that you'd want to share with the group before we share the goodies they're going to get for being part of the call today? Anything you'd like to wrap up with?
Let's see. You know, the one thought that keeps coming back to me is that if I make inclusion just about belonging as a fundamental human need, that basically when we meet it, it's like sleep. It's like having food. Like it creates energy. You know. The studies say that just increasing the inclusivity in your team, and I don't know what they defined in some of these studies, but just increasing inclusivity without diversity almost doubles team engagement. And so I think every time I think about this, I do think about how much money we're leaving on the table. Like, you know, we think that we need to be working, whatever, 40, 50, 60, 80 hours, whatever it is. When maybe if people felt energized, like they belong and they were thriving, there would be more work done in less time.
Yes.
And so, you know, people are like, you know, this woo-woo or all this kind of soft stuff, or let's talk about the dollars, right? And I'm like, this is the dollars. Money's being left on the table because people are under-engaged. People are like only 40% engaged. I wonder what would happen if people felt like they belonged. So that's kind of where I'd leave it.
Awesome. All right, Shelby, can you bring up the slide? And I just want to share with everybody what we're going to do a follow-up. So where we send out our kind of key takeaways. So you're all going to get that. You'll get a link to the recording of this session, as well as links to download Faith's peak performance pathway and a checklist for you to see where you're at in terms of building this inclusive high performance team. And I know I will include Faith's direct contact information if you'd like to follow up with her to learn more about the work that she's doing. And I know there's a lot of parents on the line too. So I mean, we didn't talk too much about Faith's other practice, but it is in terms of, you know, the parenting ninja and how to support those of you who may have children that have diverse needs in this world that we live in. And so I know that's the other side to her life that she's an extreme expert in. So we'll make sure that you've got all the contact details for that too. Okay, so next, just to kind of, those of you on the call, just to remind you a little bit, I know some of you are new to us, so at the roundtable, because I always forget to tell you who I am. Hi, I'm Glain, I'm with the Roundtable. So we are a coaching company and we specialize in 3 parts of coaching. So group coaching and group mentoring and then team coaching. And so if you have any needs in terms of breaking down silos, helping leaders navigate change, disruption, growth, any of those sorts of things that you encounter with groups, we are all about the collective learning as opposed to, you know, getting leaders to work on things by themselves in their own little personal silos. Give us a call. And in terms of another plug, I want to do a plug for my book, which is The Grassroots Leadership Revolution. It is a DIY guide for you to create your own leadership coaching program within your organization or with a group of peers. And so feel free to pick that up. There's all kinds of great tools that we have available through that book as well. And of course, if you need help setting it up, give us a call. And then our next session, we're going to have my friend Martin Buckland on. He is a global career coach. And so he is going to be talking about, you know, your career, managing your career. I know a lot of people are facing a lot of uncertainty right now around careers. So we're going to be picking the brains of Martin and all of his, you know, all of his wisdom on the 22nd of September. So thank you everybody for being with us today. Watch out for the follow-ups coming your way soon. And be sure to follow us on all of our social channels to stay in the loop on everything Roundtable. So Faye, thank you once again. It was so wonderful spending time with you. Really appreciate it. Thanks everybody.
Bye.
Bye Faith.